The reactor didn't explode, the city didn't vanish, and the impossible somehow stayed standing. Not because of alien strength, but because a human body that should have failed chose to hold anyway. What happened next rewrote how an entire species understands weight. Where are you watching from? Subscribe to the channel to help it grow. And now, the story begins. Daniel Brooks stood at the edge of the Carey Furnace Overlook, watching rust eat through history. The old bridge stretched across the Monongahela Valley like a skeleton refusing to collapse, held together by memory more than metal. He knew that feeling. His breath came heavy climbing the 12 steps to the viewpoint. 52 years old, body aged 30 years beyond that. The scar tissue in his lower back pulled with each movement, a constant reminder that some weights never fully let go. The data pad in his calloused hands displayed structural analysis for a housing development downtown. Simple work, remote, safe. The kind of consulting that paid bills without asking his spine to remember what it used to carry. A notification blinked. He almost dismissed it. Subject: Humanitarian Structural Advisory. Urgent request. Daniel's thumb hovered. Humanitarian and structural were words that didn't belong together unless something had already gone wrong. He opened it. The document was dense with technical specifications, load calculations, gravitational field parameters. Standard decommissioning protocol for an experimental reactor in the industrial zone. Nothing unusual until the fourth page, buried in the personnel notes. Primary operator unavailable due to emotional collapse. Secondary structural support required. Emotional collapse. Not mechanical failure, not technical malfunction. Emotional. Daniel's eyes fixed on those words. In 40 years of industrial work, he'd seen metal fail in every conceivable way. Fatigue fractures, compression failures, catastrophic shear. But metal didn't collapse emotionally. People did. He scrolled further. The operator was listed as Karshnaya of HFY species, 4 meters tall, mass anchoring specialist, cleared for loads exceeding 2,000 metric tons, and she couldn't work. Something in Daniel's chest tightened. Not the old familiar pain of loss, but recognition. He'd stood in those same boots. Different scale, same weight, the kind that doesn't show up on load sensors. His house felt smaller when he returned. Empty rooms that used to hold noise, laughter, arguments about homework and curfews. The stairs to the second floor creaked the same way they had the night the company called to tell him about the collapse, about the miscalculation, about his son. They'd used careful words: structural failure, unforeseen load redistribution, tragic accident. They never said sorry. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Tommy used to spread out his math homework, and read the contract 3 times. The pay was irrelevant. The timeline was aggressive. The risk assessment made his insurance agent weep. None of that mattered. What mattered was a single line in the psychological assessment attached to the file. Operator demonstrates acute functional trauma following load drop incident. Refuses all cargo handling above minimal thresholds. Weight doesn't break steel, Daniel thought. It breaks whoever thinks they can carry it alone. He signed the contract at 11:47 p.m. Not for the money, for the 4 words that made a giant stop moving. Emotional collapse. The industrial valley opened before Daniel like a wound in the earth. Scaffolding surrounded the reactor core, temporary structures dwarfing the permanent ones. Equipment worth more than entire cities scattered across the site in organized chaos. And sitting apart from it all, perfectly still, was Karshnaya. Daniel saw her before anyone bothered with introductions. 4 meters of coiled power reduced to absolute stillness. Her skin held the color of aged amber, darker than he expected, with natural patterns like mineral veins running along her arms. Even motionless, her presence commanded the space around her. Beautiful, he thought, then immediately felt foolish. She was an alien, a giant, someone clearly in pain. That last part he recognized instantly. A Thessari supervisor approached, movements efficient and cold. "You are the human consultant. I am Threlka. This project was progressing adequately until the primary operator experienced degradation. Degradation, the way someone might describe metal fatigue. "Tell me about the incident," Daniel said. Threlka's expression didn't change. 7 planetary rotations ago, Operator Karhanaya dropped a secondary mass stabilizer during testing. No casualties, minimal equipment damage. However, her functional capacity has deteriorated to unacceptable levels. She will not engage loads above Class 3. Class 3 meaning what? Approximately 500 kilograms. Daniel looked at Karhanaya again. A being designed to anchor orbital structures couldn't lift more than half a ton. Not physically couldn't. The supervisor made that clear. Wouldn't. "I need to observe her working," Daniel said. "Inadvisable. Her failures are disruptive to scheduling." "Then I'll observe her failing." The supervisor's disapproval radiated like heat, but he gestured toward the site. Daniel walked closer, each step measured against the pain in his back. Construction workers, both human and alien, moved around the reactor with practiced coordination. None approached Karhanaya. She sat on reinforced platform designed for equipment storage, arms held close to her body. Her hands, easily the size of Daniel's torso, trembled slightly. Not weakness, recognition. A human technician brought a component forward, maybe 200 kilograms, nothing for someone her size. The man set it near her, spoke briefly, moved away. Karhanaya stared at it. Her breathing changed. Daniel could see it from 30 meters away. Faster, shallow. The same pattern he'd watched in the mirror after Tommy died, when going back to work meant trusting cables and calculations again. She reached for the component. Her hand stopped centimeters away. She tried again. Stopped. On the third attempt, her fingers actually touched the metal. She lifted it, smooth and controlled. 3 seconds, 5. Then her hand opened. The component fell, not dropped, not thrown, simply released, as if her body refused the command to hold. The sound of metal hitting concrete echoed across the site. Every worker stopped. Every eye turned toward Karhanaya. She remained perfectly still, staring at her own hands like they belonged to someone else. Daniel understood immediately. She doesn't see the weight, he realized. She sees every other time she dropped something. Every moment of failure stacked into a single crushing load. The Thesari supervisor approached her, speaking in rapid clicks that didn't require translation. Disappointment needed no language. Karhanaya stood slowly and walked away from the reactor. Away from the workers. Away from anyone who might ask her to lift something again. But as she moved, her eyes passed over Daniel, just for a moment. And in that moment, he saw everything he'd felt standing over his son's grave, knowing his own calculations could have prevented it. She didn't see him as help. She saw him as witness to her shame. Daniel spent 3 days studying the reactor without touching it. He ignored the official protocols, the Thesari engineering specifications, the timeline pressure from supervisors who wanted results yesterday. Instead, he watched Karhanaya. She appeared each morning at the same time, positioned herself at the same distance from the reactor, and sat. Just sat. Her hands stayed close to her body. Her eyes tracked every movement of equipment, but never the loads themselves. When workers moved heavy components, she looked away. On the 4th day, Daniel submitted his initial assessment. Threlka read it with visible confusion. This report contains no structural analysis, only psychological observations. "Because the structure is fine," Daniel said. "Your reactor isn't the problem." "Then what requires correction?" "Your operator is carrying weight you can't measure." Here, Threlka's expression shifted to something that might have been contempt on a human face. "Karhanaya's psychological state is not within your contracted scope. We require decommissioning solutions, not counseling. You require someone who can actually move your reactor. Right now, that's nobody. Thesari protocols do not acknowledge emotional compromise as valid operational failure." Daniel felt his jaw tighten. "Then your protocols are broken." The confrontation drew attention. Other Thessari supervisors approached, their massive forms creating shadows that swallowed the afternoon sun. Daniel's spine sent sharp reminders about picking fights with beings who could bench press mountains. He didn't back down. Your specifications require load precision within 0.03% variance, Daniel continued, pulling up data on his pad. That level of control demands absolute confidence in your own capabilities. Your operator doesn't have that anymore. Until she does, this reactor stays exactly where it is. You presume to understand Thessari functional capacity. I understand what happens when someone stops trusting themselves under load. I've been that person. Silence spread across the site. Even the human workers stopped to listen. Threlka stepped closer, close enough that Daniel had to crane his neck back to maintain eye contact. Your species processes trauma through emotional expression. Ours does not. Karnea requires only proper motivation to resume optimal function. If motivation worked, she'd be working. She's not. That tells me everything. Then you have wasted 4 days to confirm what we already knew. I confirm that you don't know the difference between can't and won't. She can lift your reactor. She won't, because last time she tried, something went wrong. Until someone addresses what went wrong here. Daniel tapped his chest. Nothing changes out there. He gestured toward the reactor, then immediately regretted the dramatic movement when his back spasmed. He managed not to wince. Barely. Threlka made a sound that might have been dismissal or disgust. Hard to tell with alien physiology. You are relieved of this contract. Fine by me. Daniel turned to leave, each step deliberate against the pain, when a voice stopped him. Not Threlka's, deeper, softer. Wait. Karhanaya stood 20 meters away. She'd approached without sound despite her size. Up close she was even more striking than from a distance. Her eyes, disproportionately large and expressive, held something Daniel recognized immediately. Desperate hope. You said you have been this person, Karhanaya spoke slowly, as if translating each word carefully. The one who cannot trust, the one who carries weight that sensors cannot measure. Yeah. Then tell me how. Her voice cracked slightly. How do humans carry what they cannot lift? They met after the day shift ended, when the site fell quiet except for automated monitoring systems. Karhanaya led Daniel to a section of scaffolding reinforced to support her weight, away from supervisors and curious observers. She sat first, then gestured for him to do the same. Even sitting, she towered over him. The difference should have been intimidating. Instead, it felt oddly equal. In Thessari culture, she began without preamble, we are what we carry. A Thessari who cannot lift is a Thessari, without purpose, without identity. Daniel listened, letting the silence stretch. I was designed for this. Genetically optimized, trained from first consciousness. My entire biology exists to stabilize mass under gravitational stress. When I anchor, I become part of the structure itself. My body generates a localized field that redistributes weight across my skeletal framework. That's the power they mentioned in the files, the anchoring thing? Karhanaya nodded. It requires complete mental clarity, perfect confidence. Any emotional instability disrupts the field coherence. Fear, doubt, guilt, these are incompatible with proper function. Sounds lonely. She looked at him, surprise flickering across her features. Lonely? Being perfect or being nothing. No room for anything in between. Karhanaya's hands tightened slightly. That is our strength. Humans fracture under pressure. Thessari endure. Until you don't. The words landed heavier than he intended. Karhanaya's expression shifted, something vulnerable breaking through the stoic facade. Yes, she said quietly, until we don't. Daniel pulled his datapad out, called up an old photo. His son Tommy, age 16, grinning in front of the same bridge they'd visited that morning. He held it up so Karhanaya could see. Structural collapse, 8 years ago. Bad load calculation on a residential renovation. The building came down during occupancy. My son was inside. Karnaya leaned closer, studying the image. You were responsible for the calculation? No, but I should have caught it. I reviewed the plans 3 times, signed off on everything. The math was there, I just didn't see it. Then the fault was not yours. Tell that to the part of my brain that replays it every night. Understanding dawned in her eyes. You carry weight that was never yours to bear. Same as you, I'm guessing. Karhanaya's gaze dropped to her hands, those enormous, powerful hands that currently held nothing. The component I dropped, it landed near a structural weak point I had not properly assessed. The impact compromised a support column. A technician was working nearby. Daniel waited. She survived, severe injuries, but alive. Her name was Thren. She was the daughter of council leader Vross. Karanaya's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I have not lifted anything significant since. Every time I try, I see her crushed beneath what I failed to hold. That's not failure. That's being human. I am not human. No, but you're alive. And being alive means sometimes the weight wins. They sat in silence for several minutes. Above them, the stars emerged, the same stars visible from Earth and from Thess, however many light-years apart. Finally, Karhanaya spoke again. How did you return to work after your son? Daniel's laugh was bitter. Took me 2 years. Even then, I only took remote consulting. Couldn't be on site. Couldn't be around actual loads. He paused. Still can't, really. This job is the first time I've been in a construction zone since Tommy died. Why did you come? Because your supervisor used the words emotional collapse in a technical report. That's not normal. That's someone crying for help in the only language they know. Something shifted in Karanaya's posture. She straightened slightly, and for the first time since Daniel arrived, she looked less like someone defeated and more like someone considering possibilities. A support beam nearby creaked, metal settling under thermal stress. Instinctively, Karhanaya's hand shot out, steadying it before Daniel even registered the movement. Then she froze, staring at her own hand in contact with the metal. She touched it without thinking, without fear. Daniel smiled. How about we try something tomorrow? Nothing big, just small. We lift small first. Karhanaya's voice held the faintest hint of hope. You believe I can relearn trust? I believe you don't need to carry worlds, you just need to trust that someone's holding it with you. They started with 50 kilograms, a toolbox that any human worker could manage with effort. For Karhanaya, it might as well have been a mountain. Daniel positioned it on a waist-high platform, well within her reach. The morning crew watched from a respectful distance, human and Thessari alike. Word had spread that something unusual was happening. Just pick it up, Daniel said. Hold it for 10 seconds. Put it down. Karhanaya stared at the toolbox, her hands flexed, relaxed, flexed again. 5 minutes passed. I cannot, she finally said. You can't or you won't. The distinction seems irrelevant. It's the only distinction that matters. Daniel moved closer, ignoring the protests from his spine. Your body works fine. I've seen you move. This isn't about strength. Then what is it about? Permission to be imperfect. Karhanaya's eyes met his. Something flickered there, fragile and desperate. She reached out. Slowly, her hand wrapped around the toolbox handle. She lifted it. 3 seconds, 5, 8. At 9 seconds, her hand started shaking. At 10, she set it down. Carefully, perfectly controlled. The watching workers erupted in scattered applause. Karhanaya looked startled, as if she'd forgotten they were there. Daniel grinned. See? Small victories. Over the next week, they progressed steadily. 75 kilograms, 100, 200. Each increase measured in Karhanaya's comfort level, not Daniel's timeline. Threlka complained daily about pace. Daniel ignored him daily. Something else grew alongside Karanaya's confidence. During breaks, she started asking Daniel about human culture, why humans laughed at their own failures, why they formed emotional attachments to other species, why they cared about beings they just met. Daniel tried explaining, often failed, but Karanaya kept asking, and that seemed more important than the answers. On the 8th day, she lifted a 300-kilogram component and held it for 90 seconds. When she set it down, she turned to Daniel with an expression he'd learned to recognize as Thesare amusement. "Your humor is infectious," she said. "I find myself attempting sarcasm with other technicians. They are concerned." Daniel laughed. "Sarcasm is peak human evolution. You're assimilating nicely." "I do not wish to assimilate, I wish to understand." "Same thing, really." Their hands brushed as they adjusted the next test load. The contact lasted barely a second. Neither acknowledged it. Both noticed. That afternoon, a priority transmission arrived from the Thesari Council. Threlka delivered the news with visible satisfaction. "The Council has reviewed progress reports. Karhanaya will perform a complete reactor stabilization test in 48 hours. Daniel's blood went cold. "That's not enough time." "The Council does not negotiate timelines with human contractors. She's not ready for a full test." The Council disagrees. Karhanaya stood nearby, her earlier confidence evaporating in real time. "I will comply with Council directives." "No," Daniel said flatly, "you won't." Threlka's expression hardened. "You presume authority you do not possess." "I presume that pushing someone before they're ready is how you got into this mess. Confidence doesn't have a deadline." The supervisor moved to respond, but Karhanaya raised her hand. The gesture was slight, but Threlka fell silent immediately. "Why does the Council demand this now?" she asked quietly. "They have determined your rehabilitation has progressed sufficiently." "Based on what assessment?" Threlka hesitated, just for a moment, but Daniel caught it. "Based on remote monitoring of your recent successful lifts." Remote monitoring. Daniel's mind raced. They'd been watching, measuring, calculating not Karhanaya's readiness, but their own political timeline. "They want proof," Daniel said. "Public proof that Thesari don't break, that emotional trauma can be fixed on schedule." Karhanaya's face went absolutely still. "I am not a propaganda demonstration. Tell them that. I cannot refuse Council directive." "You can. You just choose not to." The words hit harder than Daniel intended. Karanaya turned away, her shoulders tight with tension that had nothing to do with physical weight. That night, she didn't meet him at their usual spot. Daniel waited anyway, watching stars wheel overhead and wondering how many ways he'd just made everything worse. Daniel's former colleague Marcus arrived unannounced the next morning, looking uncomfortable in a way that meant bad news. "You need to see something," Marcus said, pulling up encrypted files on a secured tablet. "Got these from a friend in interspecies labor relations. Figured you should know what you walked into." The files detailed the original accident, not the sanitized version in Karhanaya's personnel file, the real one. Thren hadn't just been injured, she'd been crushed from the waist down. 16 hours of surgery, permanent mobility limitations, early retirement from active service at age 32, and she was Council Leader Vros's only daughter. Daniel read through incident reports, political communiques, internal Thesari Council debates. The picture emerged slowly, each piece worse than the last. The Council hadn't sent Karanaya to Earth for rehabilitation. They'd sent her to be publicly broken and rebuilt, proof that Thesari perfection could be restored through proper discipline. The timeline, the monitoring, the forced test, everything was calculated for maximum political impact. "There's more," Marcus said quietly. "The test they're demanding? It's using the exact same reactor configuration that failed before, same load distribution, same stress points. They're recreating the accident." "Yeah, Best guess? Frost wants vindication. Either Karhanaya succeeds and proves his daughter's injury was purely Karhanaya's fault, or she fails again and justifies stripping her of status entirely. Daniel's hands tightened on the tablet. This was never about helping her. No, it was about using her. And they're using you too. The human consultant who fixed their broken operator makes for great cross-species cooperation press. When Daniel found Karhanaya that evening, she was attempting to lift a mid-range load alone. Her hands shook violently. The component tilted. She set it down before it fell, but the near miss clearly rattled her. "How long have you known?" Daniel asked. She didn't pretend confusion. "About the Council's true purpose? Since before I arrived on Earth." "And you said nothing." "What would I say? That I am a political instrument? That my rehabilitation is theater?" Her voice cracked. "I already knew these things. Knowing you knew them as well would only make it worse. I'm not here because of their damn politics." "Aren't you?" She turned to face him. "You signed a contract. You saw a broken operator and thought perhaps fixing me would fix something in yourself. Am I not your project of redemption, Daniel Brooks?" The accusation hit like a physical blow. Daniel opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Maybe at first," he admitted. "Maybe I saw you and thought about Tommy and wanted to save someone I couldn't save before. But that's not why I'm still here." "Then why?" "Because somewhere between the toolbox and now you stopped being a project. You became a person I give a damn about." Karhanaya's expression cycled through several emotions Daniel couldn't name. "Your species forms attachments too easily. It is a weakness." "Yeah, well, we've got a lot of those. Doesn't stop us from trying." "The Council will not cancel the test. Frost will ensure it proceeds. I will either succeed and validate his daughter's suffering, or fail and lose everything." Her hands clenched. "There is no outcome where I am not a tool." "Then don't give them a tool. Give them a person who refuses to be used." "I cannot refuse Council directive. You keep saying that. I keep not believing it." Karhanaya made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "You do not understand. In Thessari culture, to defy the Council is to defy everything we are, our structure, our purpose, our identity. Your identity is what you carry, right? Well, right now you're carrying their weight, not yours." Daniel stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat radiating from her massive frame. "Maybe it's time to drop something." She looked at him for a long moment. "I am not ready for this test. You know this." "I know. I will likely fail. Probably." "And you would have me refuse anyway?" "I'd have you choose yourself for once instead of choosing their expectations." Karhanaya was quiet for so long Daniel thought he'd lost her. Then, very softly, she said, "I do not know who I am without their expectations." "Then maybe it's time to find out." She turned and walked away, her footsteps heavy despite her attempt at quiet. Daniel watched her go, wondering if honesty had just cost him the only thing that mattered. Behind him, Marcus cleared his throat. "That went well." "Shut up, Marcus. Just saying, for a guy trying to help, you're really good at pushing people away." Daniel didn't answer, because Marcus was right, and they both knew it. Daniel spent the next day in his rented quarters, pain medication doing nothing for the ache in his spine. The corporate housing was sterile, impersonal, designed for temporary occupation. Like everything else about this job, it pretended to be something it wasn't. His datapad buzzed with messages. Marcus checking in, Threlka demanding status updates, official notices about the upcoming test. He ignored all of them. Instead, he pulled up photos of Tommy. Not the smiling ones, the ones from after the funeral, when Daniel spent months photographing construction sites, documenting every support beam, every load calculation, every point where weight met structure, as if enough observation could rewrite the past. His back spasmed, sharp and sudden. Daniel gasped, hand flying to his lower spine. The scar tissue pulled like hot wire. He'd pushed too hard lately, done too much. The body kept score even when the mind tried to forget. He dry swallowed another pill and stared at the ceiling. The panic attack came without warning. One moment, ceiling tiles. The next, Tommy's face. The structural diagrams. The phone call. The terrible silence of arriving too late. Daniel's breath shortened. His vision tunneled. The walls pressed inward. He saw the beam. Always the beam. The one that shouldn't have fallen. The one his calculations said would hold. It took 20 minutes for reality to reassemble itself into something recognizable. Across the industrial site, Karanaya stood alone in the reactor chamber. The test was 12 hours away. She'd requested privacy. Supervisors granted it, likely hoping isolation would force compliance. She stared at the reactor core, trying to summon the anchoring field. Her body knew the sequence. Genetic memory, trained reflex, cellular certainty. She'd done this 1,000 times. Before. Now, when she reached for that place of absolute confidence, she found only Thren's scream. The sound a body makes when thousands of kilograms land where they shouldn't. The wet crack of bones never designed to bear such weight. Karhinaya's hands rose toward the reactor, shook, lowered. She tried again, and again. Each attempt ending in the same failure. On the 7th attempt, something broke. Not the reactor, not the structure. Her. Karhanaya sank to her knees, a gesture so foreign to the Sari physiology that her joints protested. Giants didn't kneel. Giants didn't break down. Giants didn't cry. She did anyway. The sobs came without sound at first, then louder, echoing off metal walls that had witnessed countless perfect performances. Now they witnessed collapse. Human workers on perimeter duty heard it first. The sound of something vast and powerful reduced to raw grief. They looked at each other, uncertain whether intervening would help or make it worse. One started forward, an older woman, maybe 50, with a weathered look of someone who'd seen things break before. "Leave her be," her colleague said. "She's hurting." "So let her hurt. Sometimes that's the only way through." Back in his quarters, Daniel's breathing finally steadied. He sat up, every movement careful, and checked his messages. One new notification. From Karhanaya. It contained no words, just a location marker and a timestamp. Their usual meeting place. 20 minutes from now. Daniel almost didn't go. His body screamed at him to rest. His mind whispered that maybe some weights weren't meant to be carried. He went anyway. He found her exactly where he expected, sitting on the reinforced platform, staring at nothing. Her eyes were red. Thesari didn't cry the way humans did, but the evidence was unmistakable. Daniel sat beside her without speaking. The size difference should have been absurd. A man barely reaching her shoulder, presuming to offer comfort through presence alone. She didn't acknowledge him at first, just kept staring into the darkness beyond the site lights. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I tried to do it alone. The anchoring. I thought perhaps without witnesses, without pressure, I could remember how." A pause. "I could not." Daniel said nothing. "Tomorrow, I will fail publicly. The council will strip my designation. Frost will have his vindication, and I will return to Thess as proof that emotional compromise is functional death. You don't have to do the test. I do not have the strength to refuse." "Strength?" Daniel laughed bitterly. "I had a panic attack an hour ago over something that happened 8 years past. Nearly broke my back trying to help someone who doesn't want my help. I'm 52 years old, broken in places that don't heal, and I came to this job thinking I could fix something I can't even name." He turned to look at her. "We're both carrying weight that doesn't belong to us. Difference is, I'm done pretending I can do it alone." Karhanaya met his eyes. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that maybe the weight doesn't need to be carried. Maybe it just needs to be set down." "And then what?" "Then we figure out what comes next." They sat in silence as the night deepened. Two broken people sitting beside each other, not fixing anything, not solving anything, just not being alone. For now, It was enough. Morning arrived with unexpected visitors. Daniel woke to commotion outside the quarters. Through the window he saw them. Dozens of human workers who'd been gradually reassigned away from the reactor site over the past week. Construction engineers, crane operators, structural specialists. They were coming back. Marcus stood at the front looking tired but determined. When Daniel stepped outside, Marcus thrust a coffee into his hand. Heard through the grapevine that the tests today. Also heard most of the human crew got mysteriously transferred to other projects. Council wants a clean demonstration, no human interference. Yeah, well, thing about humans. We're real bad at following orders we didn't agree to. Marcus gestured to the assembled workers. 43 of us. Everyone who was originally assigned here. We're staying. They'll terminate your contracts. Probably. But we've been watching you and the Giant. We know what this test really is. An older engineer stepped forward. That's not engineering. That's punishment dressed up as protocol. Daniel felt something tight in his chest loosen slightly. The Council won't let you interfere. They can't stop us from being here. Can't stop us from offering help if it's requested. Marcus paused. Can they? They could. Easily. But the optics of Thessari forcibly removing human workers who volunteered for a humanitarian mission would be politically complicated. Daniel found Karhanaya in the reactor chamber, preparing for the test with mechanical precision. When she saw him, something flickered across her face. Relief, maybe, or fear that hope had returned when she'd finally managed to let it go. They sent you to convince me, she said. No, I came to give you an alternative. There is no alternative to Council directive. There's always an alternative. It just might not be easy. Daniel pulled up a schematic on his datapad. What if we don't use you as the primary anchor? Karanaya's brow furrowed. The reactor requires mass stabilization beyond human capability. Right, but what if we don't try to match your capability? What if we redesign the approach entirely? Manual decommissioning, human engineering, distributed load-bearing. Old techniques, slow techniques, safe techniques. That would take weeks. So, we've got time. The Council demands immediate testing. The Council can demand whatever it wants. Doesn't mean we have to give it to them. Karhanaya stared at the schematic, her massive hands hovering over the display. You would risk your workers for this? They're already here. Came back on their own. Her eyes widened. They chose to return? That's what humans do. We choose to help even when it's stupid. Especially when it's stupid. For a long moment, Karhanaya didn't speak. When she did, her voice carried a weight that had nothing to do with tons and kilograms. I cannot ask you to do this. You're not asking. We're offering. If this fails, if anyone is injured, I will not forgive myself. Then join us. Not as the primary operator, as part of the team. I do not understand, Daniel smiled. You've spent your whole life being the one who carries everything. Maybe it's time to learn what it feels like to be carried. The plan came together over the next hour. Human engineers would handle primary load distribution using conventional techniques, manual cable systems, old-school lever mechanics, distributed weight across multiple support points. The kind of engineering that existed before gravity manipulation, before mass anchoring, before any species decided that one person should carry everything alone. Karhanaya would provide secondary stabilization, not the full anchoring field, just enough to smooth out destabilization events, support, not solution. Threlka arrived to observe the preparation with visible disdain. This approach violates established protocol. Your established protocol demands one person do what should require a team, Daniel shot back. We're fixing that. The Council will not approve this deviation. The Council can file a complaint. You understand this will reflect poorly on your species' reliability? I understand that reliability means doing what's right, not what's ordered. Karhanaya stepped forward then, and for the first time since Daniel arrived, She stood at her full height without shame, bowing her shoulders. Threlka, inform the Council that I am proceeding with an alternative decommissioning strategy. Human collaborative approach. My decision. You do not have authority to make such decisions. Then stop me. The challenge hung in the air. Threlka could call enforcement, could shut down the entire operation, but doing so would mean admitting that Thessary authority required force to maintain compliance. After a long pause, he turned and left without another word. Marcus whistled low. That was something. That was terrifying, Karhanaya admitted, but also liberating. Daniel clapped her leg, the highest point he could comfortably reach. Welcome to human stubbornness. It's addictive. The team assembled. 43 humans and one giant alien who'd spent her whole life believing she had to be perfect. Today, they'd all be imperfect together. Daniel looked around at the faces, human and Thessari alike. Either we lift this together, or we don't lift it at all. Everyone clear? A chorus of affirmatives. Karhania added her voice to theirs. Softer but no less certain. Together. The decommissioning began at dawn. 70% of the reactor core separated without incident. Manual cable systems, distributed across 12 support points, handled loads that would have crushed individual workers. Teams rotated every 30 minutes to prevent fatigue. Old engineering, proven engineering, human engineering. Karhanaya positioned herself as secondary stabilizer, catching minor fluctuations before they cascaded into problems. Not anchoring, supporting. The distinction seemed small, but felt enormous. By hour 4, they'd reached the critical mass stabilizer. The component Karhanaya had dropped 2 months prior, replicated exactly, positioned exactly the same way. Daniel saw her hesitate, saw the memory play across her features. You good? He called up. Her voice came steady. I am adequate. Good enough. The stabilizer required synchronized lifting across 8 points. Cable tension had to match within 2% variance. Any deviation would create shear forces the structure couldn't absorb. They'd practiced this sequence 17 times. It should have worked. The first sign of trouble came from monitoring station 3. A pressure reading spiked, dropped, spiked again. Something's wrong with the feed line, the operator called. Marcus was there in seconds. It's been cut, clean slice, this isn't malfunction. Sabotage. Before anyone could react, the stabilizer's magnetic containment failed. Not gradually, catastrophically. The field collapsed inward, taking structural supports with it. The reactor core began to fall. 2,000 tons of experimental technology, radioactive materials, and volatile energy containment dropping toward the valley floor. If it hit, the resulting explosion would flatten everything within 3 kilometers. Automated systems kicked in, failed immediately. Someone had been thorough. The cable teams tried to compensate, but the load redistribution happened too fast. Support snapped. Workers scrambled clear. Alarms screamed. Karhanaya stood directly beneath the collapsing mass, frozen, her worst nightmare manifest in steel and physics. The weight she'd failed to hold before, falling again. This time, people would die. Daniel saw her paralysis and understood it completely. He'd been there. That moment when trauma becomes prophecy and the body simply refuses to participate in its own survival. He ran. Every medical professional who'd examined his spine had been clear. No heavy lifting, no sudden movements, no stress positions. The scar tissue couldn't handle it. One wrong move and he'd be paralyzed. Daniel threw himself under the nearest support cable and hauled with everything he had. The cable caught. Barely. His vision went white with pain. He felt something in his back separate, tear, scream in ways that shouldn't be possible. He held on. Karhanaya. His voice broke with strain. You weren't alone before. Are you alone now? The words cut through her paralysis. She looked down. saw Daniel, this fragile human literally destroying himself to hold weight meant for giants. Something in her broke, or maybe it finally healed. The anchoring field engaged, not the way she'd been trained, not the perfect isolated connection to mass and structure. This was messy, desperate, fueled by terror and determination, and the absolute refusal to let anyone else fall because of her. Her body became part of the reactor, part of the cables, part of Daniel's desperate grip and the 43 humans throwing themselves at impossible weight. The hybrid system worked for 5 seconds, 10, 15. Then Daniel's heart stopped, not metaphorically. His cardiac rhythm flatlined, 8 seconds of absolute nothing while his brain screamed at his body to keep going, keep holding, keep everyone alive just a little longer. Karhanaya felt it through the anchoring field, felt his life force stutter and fade. She screamed his name in English, a language she'd only learned weeks ago, and pushed the anchoring field beyond anything she'd thought possible. Not just stabilizing the reactor, but holding it, supporting it, becoming a pillar of pure determination between collapse and catastrophe. Human workers seized the moment, redirected cables, locked emergency supports, created redundancy where none should exist. The reactor settled, groaned, held. Medical teams swarmed Daniel. Defibrillator charged, deployed, his chest arched, once, twice. On the third shock, his heart remembered how to beat. Karhanaya didn't release the anchoring field until she heard the medic's confirmation. He's breathing, vitals stabilizing, he's alive. Only then did she let go. The reactor stayed stable, held by the emergency supports the team had frantically assembled. They'd done it. Together. Imperfectly. Barely. But they'd done it. Karhanaya sank to her knees beside Daniel's stretcher, her massive frame folding down until she could see his face. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused, but present. "Did we?" he managed. "We did," she whispered. "You magnificent, foolish human. We did." Daniel smiled, then passed out from the pain. Around them, 43 humans and 1 Thessari giant stood among the ruins of impossible odds, and every single one of them was still standing. Daniel spent 3 weeks in medical observation. The damage to his spine was permanent. L4 and L5 vertebrae showed compression fractures that would never fully heal. His doctors were unambiguous in their prognosis. No more field work. Ever. He accepted it with surprising peace. The investigation into the sabotage led exactly where everyone expected. Council leader Vross had authorized the cutting of safety systems, intending to force a scenario where Karhanaya would either fail catastrophically or succeed in a way that vindicated his daughter's injury as purely operator error. He hadn't anticipated human stubbornness, or collaborative engineering, or the possibility that his carefully constructed test would instead demonstrate why single-point failure systems were fundamentally flawed. Vross faced censure from the Greater Thessari Council, not for the sabotage itself, which was considered acceptable political maneuvering, but for the failure of his sabotage to achieve its intended outcome. In Thessari politics, competence mattered more than morality. His daughter Thren submitted a statement to the inquiry. Daniel never saw the full text, but Karhanaya told him the essential piece. She said she wished someone had held her father accountable for his grief instead of letting it become revenge. She said the protocol we developed, the shared load approach, was what should have been standard from the beginning. "Think it'll change anything?" Daniel asked from his hospital bed. "It already has." Karhanaya had spent the week since the incident working with Thessari engineers on something unprecedented, a new operational doctrine called the Samwise Protocol, named after a human literary reference Daniel had mentioned during one of their late-night conversations. The protocol was simple. No critical load would ever be sustained by a single operator. All mass anchoring operations would incorporate redundancy, emotional check-ins, and the explicit permission to ask for help without loss of status. It was radical. It was necessary. It was spreading. 6 other Thessari operators had already requested transfers to Earth to learn the techniques. Human construction firms were receiving contracts for interspecies collaborative projects based on demonstrated resilience and adaptive problem-solving. The political establishment hated it. The working operators loved it. Change came slowly to species designed for perfection, but it came. Daniel was cleared for discharge on a Tuesday morning. He'd arranged transport back to Pittsburgh, back to his empty house and his remote consulting work. The future looked smaller than it had a month ago, but also somehow more manageable. He was packing the last of his belongings when Karhanaya appeared in the doorway. She had to duck significantly to enter the room, her massive frame incongruous among the medical equipment. "You are leaving," she said. "Contracts fulfilled. Jobs done. I had hoped we might speak before your departure." Daniel gestured to the chair. She looked at it, then carefully lowered herself to the floor instead, folding her legs beneath her in a position that brought her face closer to his level. "I am remaining on Earth for the next 6 months," she said. "The Council has granted me extended research leave to study collaborative operational techniques." "That's great. You'll be good at it." "I will not be working during this time." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Not working? You?" "I am told humans have a concept called living, distinct from functioning. I wish to explore this concept." Her expression held something that might have been nervousness. "I was hoping you might provide guidance." "Me? I barely know how to live. That's why I work all the time." "Then perhaps we learn together." The implications settled between them, delicate and significant. Not romance exactly. Not yet. But possibility, connection, the chance to discover what existed beyond trauma and obligation. "I'd like that," Daniel said quietly. Karhanaya's hand moved, slow and deliberate. She extended one finger toward him. Daniel understood the gesture. He placed his hand against hers, his entire palm dwarfed by her smallest digit. "You did not lift the weight," she said. "You taught me where to lean, Mom, and you taught me that falling isn't the end." They stayed like that for a long moment, a broken human and a giant who'd learned that perfection was a cage. 6 months later, Daniel stood in his Pittsburgh kitchen, reviewing engineering schematics for the new Monongahela Bridge. The design incorporated human structural principles and thesory mass stabilization in equal measure, distributed load, shared responsibility, beauty in collaboration. Karhania sat at the kitchen table, her frame filling half the room, attempting to make what humans called coffee. She'd become fascinated by the ritual of it, though she still couldn't understand why humans insisted on consuming stimulants to compensate for inadequate rest cycles. "The bridge design is beautiful," she said. "It's functional. It can be both." Through the window, the old steel bridges of Pittsburgh gleamed in morning light. The city that built itself on industry and sweat now hosted the first collaborative construction academy, training humans and aliens in techniques that neither species could perfect alone. The academy's motto, suggested by a human engineer with a sense of humor, was simple: "We lift together," or "We don't lift at all." Karhanaya's communicator chimed. A message from Thess. 3 more operators requesting reassignment to the collaborative program. The waiting list was now 17 months long. "They are changing," she said softly. "Slowly, but changing. People usually do, given the right reason." She looked at him, this small human who'd somehow carried weight that shouldn't have been his to bear. "Thank you," she said, "for teaching me that strength is not the same as carrying alone." Daniel smiled. "Thank you for teaching me that falling doesn't mean staying down." Outside, the bridges held their weight against the sky. Steel and stone and the careful engineering of species learning to trust each other. Inside, 2 people who'd learned the same lesson sat together in comfortable silence. The weight would always be there. Trauma didn't disappear, bodies didn't unbreak, loss didn't reverse, but they'd learned something more important. They'd learned where to lean. And that made all the difference. Humans don't carry the impossible. They teach you that you never had to carry it alone. In the end, humanity wasn't defined by how much weight it could carry, but by the moment it finally admitted it shouldn't. Strength, it turns out, isn't standing alone under impossible pressure. It's choosing, again and again, to lean on someone else without losing yourself in the fall. So here's the uncomfortable question the universe leaves us with. How many burdens are you still carrying just because you never asked if you were allowed to set them down? When did being strong quietly turn into being alone? And if help were offered, real help, messy and imperfect, would you recognize it or refuse it out of habit? Because this story was never really about a giant, a reactor, or a heroic human spine that absolutely did not read the warranty. It was about shared weight, about the quiet rebellion of saying, "I can't do this alone," and discovering that this sentence doesn't end you, it introduces you. If this story stayed with you until the end, write the word "lean" in the comments, not as a slogan, but as a signal that you were here, carrying this moment with us. Tell us the city you're watching from, because stories travel differently when we know where they land. If this universe makes sense to you, consider subscribing, not as an algorithmic ritual, but as joining a crew that believes humanity's greatest power is collaboration with bad posture. Like the video, hype it, share it with someone who's carrying too much, and when the final card appears, stay. The next story is already waiting, and it doesn't want to be lifted alone either. Humanity doesn't win by lifting the impossible. It wins by asking who else has a hand free.